A millionaire slept with the virgin made by love, but what he discovered afterward forced them apart. That night, New Orleans trembled under a winter storm. On cobblestone streets, the yellow glow of lamps spilled across rain-slicked pavement, reflecting like shards of shattered glass. The howl of the wind merged with the heavy drumming of rain against windows, as if the entire city had become nature's mournful symphony. At the heart of the Garden District stood the Whitmore Mansion, looming like a ghost from another century. Ivory white columns, tall windows framed with heavy wood, and moss-covered walls gave the estate an air that was both majestic and unsettling. Inside, the Whitmore Foundation for Arts and Culture still radiated its opulence. A place where collectors, artists, and the city's elite gathered, not only to indulge in art, but also to flaunt their status. To outsiders, it was a symbol of heritage and refinement. But to those who had wandered its halls at night, the mansion carried another breath entirely, one of shadows, one of secrets never laid to rest. In that space moved Isabella Reyes, quietly carrying out her nightly routine. At 23, she worked the graveyard shift as a cleaner, a job invisible to most, yet essential to keep the grand estate polished each morning. With black hair cascading down her shoulders and eyes as still and muted as a winter lake, Isabella had mastered the art of moving like a shadow, leaving behind nothing but the faint sweep of her broom across the wooden floor. Her childhood had been torn apart by a wound that never healed. Her mother, a librarian, disappeared when Isabella was only 5. She grew up in an orphanage on the outskirts of New Orleans, a place of lonely cries and abandoned dreams. She had learned to live in silence, to make herself invisible, as a shield against the world. And for years, love existed only in the old films that flickered on the orphanage's worn-out television set. Tonight was no different. Isabella wandered through vast corridors, wiping away footprints left by wealthy guests, collecting abandoned glasses of wine, straightening paintings tilted after the evening's gala. To her, it was work, nothing more. Yet beneath it all smoldered that same strange ache. She lived among fragments of a luxurious world she would never touch. Elsewhere under the same roof, Nathaniel Whitmore moved with a weight far heavier than his usual air of authority. At 42, he was the sole heir of the Whitmore legacy, a name intertwined with power and prestige. Tall, his dark hair flecked with gray, his steel blue eyes carried the sharpness of a brewing storm. Nathaniel exuded a presence that inspired both admiration and unease. But beneath that polished veneer lay fractures. His childhood had been marked by a ruthless father who saw his son only as an extension of the family's ambition. A short-lived marriage, ending in betrayal, had convinced Nathaniel that love was nothing more than a gilded illusion, masking selfish desires. He managed the foundation and upheld the family's name out of duty, not conviction. Outside, the storm howled on. Inside, 2 lives that should never have intersected, a quiet orphan girl and a man of icebound power, occupied the same place on the same night. And on this rain-drenched evening, a tragedy neither could foresee was about to begin. That storm did not only batter the Whitmore Mansion's windows, it seeped into Nathaniel's heavy heart. The annual charity auction, hosted by his family, glittered with extravagance, wine shimmering under chandeliers, shallow laughter echoing across the grand hall, handshakes laced with political motives. But Nathaniel was detached. He moved through the elite circles like a shadow, nodding, offering polite smiles, yet not a single story lodged in his mind. When his private secretary slipped an aged envelope into his hand, his pulse faltered. The seal was foreign, but the handwriting struck him with brutal familiarity. "Nathaniel, I need to see you. I am not dead. I am coming back." Victor. The name cut through him like a blade. Victor Whitmore, the younger brother who had vanished 12 years ago after a bitter quarrel with their father. Presumed dead after fruitless searches, Victor had once been the only family member Nathaniel truly loved. The letter sent his world spinning. Laughter, music, chatter, all blurred into silence. Stumbling toward the bar, Nathaniel downed 3 heavy whiskeys, ignoring the bartender's frown. Yet the alcohol could not dissolve the knot in his chest. He needed air. He needed solitude. He climbed the marble staircase to the old wing on the 2nd floor. The door opened, and a faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Someone had cleaned recently. The bed was neatly covered with crisp white sheets, the pillows arranged carefully. Nathaniel Whitmore collapsed onto it, still in his formal attire, the crumpled letter clutched in his hand. Outside, the rain played a mournful melody, blending with the storm of emotions inside his chest. The wine blurred reality. In his daze, he thought of Victor. If they were to meet again, what would they say to each other? He drifted into sleep, still holding the letter against his chest, while below the party continued with strained laughter. He did not hear the soft footsteps approaching, nor did he see the door slowly open. Isabella Reyes had just finished cleaning the restroom downstairs and went upstairs to complete her shift. She stepped into the room, startled to find a man lying on the bed. It was Nathaniel Whitmore, the director of the institute, who in her 3 years of working there had never once spoken to her. He lay there, his hair disheveled, his tuxedo wrinkled, looking fragile. So different from the cold image he displayed in daylight. Isabella should have turned away immediately, but exhaustion weighed down her body and she sat on the edge of the bed, as far from him as possible, intending to rest for a few minutes. The lavender scent she herself had sprayed while making the bed mixed with the trace of his cologne, creating a strange atmosphere. The sound of the rain lulled her. She slowly drifted off, her head resting on the soft feather pillow. An hour later, Nathaniel stirred. In his drunken haze, he felt a feminine presence. He was accustomed to the fact that at grand events, there were sometimes unspoken arrangements meant to please distinguished guests. In his intoxication, he believed this was such a moment. His hand brushed against the soft body beside him. Isabella woke in shock, terrified but motionless. A strange paralysis held her still. She should have screamed, should have run, but instead remained frozen. Perhaps it was the way he touched her, not rough, but tender, as though she were fragile glass. Or perhaps it was the emptiness in her soul, years without ever being desired by anyone. She closed her eyes, pretending to sleep. Nathaniel, still drunk, believed he was living a moment of consent. That night, under the pounding rain, two lonely souls fell into a forbidden encounter. Not entirely violent, yet not truly consensual. When Nathaniel entered her, shattering her innocence, Isabella felt as though a wall within her crumbled. At dawn, Nathaniel awoke, head throbbing, mouth parched. He noticed the streak of blood on the sheet. A wave of nausea rose as he realized the girl had been a virgin, and that lavender scent, the familiar fragrance of the cleaning staff. Isabella had already left early, but she carried within her a transformation she could never conceal. The days that followed in the Whitmore mansion carried a weight difficult to describe. Beneath gleaming wooden walls and chandeliers that sparkled as always, Isabella lived in shadow. She worked more quietly than ever, deliberately erasing every trace of herself to avoid confronting the truth. She shifted her shifts to later hours, avoided corridors Nathaniel often crossed. Her footsteps grew as cautious as a ghost, but her heart could not be silenced. Each time the echo of polished shoes approached from afar, Isabella startled, palms damp with cold sweat. She did not know if it was fear or expectation. For Nathaniel, guilt roared like a storm within. He could not sleep through the night, could not focus on reports or meetings. The memory of that rain-soaked evening returned in the smallest triggers. The scent of lavender, the sound of rainfall, or the brief flicker of Isabella's eyes as she passed with her head lowered. He tried to avoid the places she moved, yet found himself drifting into those very halls, as if drawn by an invisible pull binding them despite their mutual retreat. One gloomy afternoon, rain returned to the city. Isabella climbed the grand staircase carrying her bucket and cloth. Each step echoed through the empty hall. Suddenly, from above, Nathaniel descended. The moment froze. Isabella halted mid-stair, eyes fixed on the marble floor while Nathaniel approached, his posture stern, though his eyes betrayed turmoil. When they met on the same step, the distance shrank to a breath. Nathaniel looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, pale skin, fragile features, eyes heavy with sorrow, yet burning with a faint ember. In that instant, Nathaniel knew with certainty he had made a terrible mistake. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I'm sorry." Isabella Reyes lifted her eyes. In that gaze, Nathaniel Whitmore saw pain, but also something else, a spark of defiance. Why? She asked, her voice stronger than he had expected. Sorry for touching me? Or because you finally realized that I exist? The question struck him motionless. He had braced for tears, accusations, even threats. But instead, what he faced was wounded pride, sharper than any scream. He blurted out, I didn't know it was you. I was drunk. I was mistaken. Yet the moment he saw the disappointment in her eyes, Nathaniel instantly realized those words only made everything worse. To her, he still regarded her as invisible. So much so that even after a night of intimacy, he did not recognize her as a human being. Exactly, Isabella replied, adjusting the bucket with a dignity that made his heart tighten. To people like you, those like me don't exist. We're just furniture, like trees in the background. She continued up the staircase, leaving him frozen in place, consumed by shame. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel Whitmore became increasingly haunted by Isabella Reyes. He searched for her in the hallways, noted her work schedule, and found excuses to pass by the places she often cleaned. It was no longer just physical desire. It had become something deeper, something more consuming. He could not forget her gray eyes and the wounded pride etched in them. Meanwhile, Isabella lived in a state of constant vigilance. Every footstep in the corridor made her heart race. Every male figure in sight caused her body to stiffen. And yet, ironically, some hidden part of her longed for those encounters. Because that night, for the first time in her life, she had been desired, even if in the most wrongful way. And that very feeling planted in her a dangerous curiosity. One hot March afternoon, when the oppressive heat of the capital finally softened, Isabella decided to do something she had never dared before, to uncover the truth about her own past. She discovered that her mother, Rose, had once worked for the Whitmore family as Richard Whitmore's secretary, Nathaniel's father. Isabella stumbled upon an old file, its yellowed pages forgotten, where she found handwritten letters from her mother addressed to someone only signed as R.W. The letters revealed a forbidden relationship, the crushing weight of secrecy, promises of protection, and eventual betrayal. He said he would take care of me and my child, one letter read, that the baby would have a future, that I needn't worry. But in his eyes, I saw only fear. Fear of his wife, fear of scandal, fear of losing everything. So what about me and the child, when I can no longer hide this growing belly? Isabella trembled. The initials R.W. could only belong to one man, Richard Whitmore, Nathaniel's father. If the dates matched, then her mother had been his secret lover. And if true, the unthinkable loomed. Isabella herself might be Richard's illegitimate child. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Whitmore was also haunted by his family's past. The letter from Victor still tormented his mind, but there had been no further news from his younger brother. He began searching through the family's old documents, hoping to find a clue. In one of his mother Marina's boxes of correspondence, he discovered a few notes he had never seen before. A letter from 2001 mentioned a delicate situation with the secretary and the need to resolve it before it turns into a public scandal. Those vague lines hinted at the existence of an illegitimate child and at the shadowy measures Richard was willing to take to protect the family's reputation. Fragmented memories returned, old rumors about a female employee who had mysteriously disappeared. At the time, Nathaniel had been in college and paid little attention. Now, all the pieces connected into a grim picture. In search of answers, he visited the modest home of Mr. Lawrence, the retired butler who had served the Whitmores for 3 decades. Lawrence lived in a small house in New Orleans, sustained by a family pension. When Nathaniel knocked on his door, the old man received him with the same familiar respect, though his eyes betrayed an understanding of unspoken truths. "Don Lawrence," Nathaniel said, sitting down in the modest living room filled with old photographs. "I need you to tell me about Rose, the employee who worked at the Institute more than 20 years ago." The old man's face closed up, like a clam clutching its pearl. "That was a long time ago. My memory isn't what it used to be." But Nathaniel, with instincts inherited from his father, recognized this as evasion. He asked directly, "My father had an affair with her, didn't he?" Mr. Lawrence exhaled heavily, as if carrying this secret had weighed him down for too long. "Your father was a powerful man, and powerful men often do things they must hide." He recounted how, on a stormy night, Rose disappeared. Richard claimed she had gone back to her hometown, but his eyes did not carry the look of a man returning a daughter to her family. "And what about the child?" Nathaniel asked, his voice roughened. Mr. Lawrence closed his eyes as if debating whether the truth should remain buried. When he opened them, they brimmed with sorrow. "There was a little girl with gray eyes like her mother. Your father arranged for her to be sent to the orphanage on the outskirts of New Orleans. He said it would be better that way, that the child would have opportunities he could never give openly. That was the very orphanage where Isabella Reyes had grown up." Nathaniel left Mr. Lawrence's house like a man defeated. His suspicions had now hardened into certainty. The guilt he carried was no longer just an error. It became an existential nausea, clinging to every breath. If Isabella truly was his half-sister, then that night was not just a mistake. It was a sin beyond naming, an affront to the universe itself. He drove through the streets in a daze, streetlights and traffic signals blurring before his eyes. By the time he returned to the institute, it was nearly midnight. The building lay silent, lit only by the faint glow of the security lamps. In the halls, Isabella was surely still working. The cruel thought crushed Nathaniel. For weeks he had longed for her, been obsessed with her, while in truth she could very well be his sister. Meanwhile, Isabella was in the basement, surrounded by the documents she had just uncovered. Beyond her mother's letters, she found financial records. Every month, Richard Whitmore had transferred money to the orphanage on the outskirts of New Orleans for exactly 18 years, the span of her life. The payments stopped the very month she came of age. This explained why Isabella had been treated with more favor than other orphans, allowed to finish high school, never suffering the same hunger and deprivation. But it also explained why she had always carried a profound loneliness. She had never been just an orphan, but a living secret, a piece of incriminating evidence forced into silence. Isabella was deep in thought when she heard the heavy footsteps above. She knew instantly Nathaniel was in the institute. Her heart pounded, not only with fear, but with the premonition of an inevitable confrontation. She gathered the documents into a folder and climbed to the ground floor. Light from Nathaniel's office spilled in a golden rectangle across the dark corridor. Through the half-closed door, she saw him hunched over the desk, his head in his hands, the image of despair, a stark contrast to his usual calm composure. Isabella stood at the threshold for a long time. In that collapse, there was something that moved her heart, a fragility she understood too well, the pain of one who bore secrets too heavy to endure. "You've discovered it too, haven't you?" she finally spoke. Nathaniel lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. Hearing her voice, his reply cracked. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't come near me." "Why?" Isabella stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The soft click echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. "Because we are siblings. Because my father destroyed your mother. Because I touched you without knowing who you were." Every word he uttered was another blade carving deeper into their shared wound. He turned toward the window, where the old tree in the garden stretched its branches like grieving arms. "It's all my fault," Nathaniel rasped. "If I had cared, if I had questioned my father about the women who disappeared, if I had been less of a coward—" Isabella stepped closer, her voice softening. "You were 18 when I was born. You were still a child yourself. You cannot bear the sins of your father." Then her voice caught. "But I can blame myself for desiring you, even after learning the truth." They faced each other again, less than a meter apart, yet divided by a chasm of morality. "And I blame myself too," Nathaniel cried like a curse. "I still crave you, even knowing who you are." Isabella gasped, not out of horror, but from the realization of the same dangerous fire burning within her. Days after the unbearable revelation, Nathaniel Whitmore secretly ordered a DNA test. The results arrived in a sealed envelope, his hands trembling as he tore it open. Line after line of clinical words told him what his heart desperately prayed for. He and Isabella Reyes shared no blood. Relief crashed over him like a wave, almost bringing him to his knees. The nightmarish guilt that had poisoned his every thought dissolved in an instant. Yet as he held the papers, Nathaniel made a choice. He folded the report, locked it away, and told no one, not even Isabella. The bond between Isabella and Nathaniel bloomed in silence, like a fragile flame hidden within ashes. They did not go public, did not date openly, only fleeting brushes of hands, stolen glances quickly turned away. But in the Whitmore mansion, no secret lasted long. One morning, tabloids across New Orleans splashed blurred but shocking photos. Nathaniel leaving a side door of the mansion at dawn, with Isabella's shadow behind him. The headline screamed, "Whitmore heir and the mysterious maid, love or scandal." Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. The elite gossiped endlessly. Some mocked, others sneered. Online, Isabella was branded with cruel words: gold digger, plaything, nameless girl clawing for fortune. Isabella endured in silence, but the wound bled with every passing hour. She knew the truth was more complex, but to the world she was nothing more than a cheap name for amusement. Nathaniel, however, chose differently. Instead of silence, he faced it. At a foundation press conference before dozens of reporters, he declared, "If you want the truth, hear it from me. That woman never used me. I was the one who made mistakes, and if there is a price to pay, I will pay it." But his words only fanned the storm. The foundation's board convened an emergency meeting. The Whitmore family intervened. Condemnations reigned. "You are destroying the family name. You've let a servant tarnish our legacy." Inside the mansion, surrounded by its familiar walls, Isabella stood across from Nathaniel. Her eyes were swollen, her voice breaking. "You don't have to do this for me. You've already lost too much. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Nathaniel stepped closer, eyes burning. "Isabella, I've lived my life in the shadows of this family. I guarded the honor they worshipped while inside I was empty. For the first time, I have something worth protecting, and I will not let them take it away." Tears streamed down Isabella's face, but deep inside she knew he could not win this war. The Whitmore family's power was too vast, and his sacrifice would only grow heavier. That night, she quietly packed her belongings. Before leaving, Isabella placed a letter on Nathaniel's desk. "You made me see I was not invisible, but if we continue, our love will only bring more ruin. Live, find the freedom you deserve. As for me, I must learn to walk on my own." By the time Nathaniel found the letter, it was too late. Isabella had vanished into the night, just as her mother had vanished years before. After the storm of scandal, the city of New Orleans seemed to slam its doors shut on them both. Nathaniel left the Whitmore mansion, carrying no gold or priceless art, only a single worn suitcase. Newspapers continued to sneer, "Fallen heir, the man who burned his own legacy." But Nathaniel no longer cared. He rented a small apartment in the suburbs, lived simply, and joined humanitarian projects supporting homeless children and street artists. To the public eye, he had lost everything. Yet in that quiet life, he found something he had never known: freedom. For the first time, he was not Richard Whitmore's son, not the heir of a dynasty. He was simply a man struggling to live honestly. Isabella, after leaving New Orleans, made her way to Austin, Texas. There she started anew, first working in a small cafe, then gradually founding a nonprofit organization called the Haven Project. Its mission was to support women who had endured abuse, giving them a space to tell their stories, to be heard, to begin healing. Each time Isabella stood before them, seeing fear mingled with hope in their eyes, she thought of her mother and of herself. Through every story, every tear, Isabella rediscovered meaning in her losses, and she realized pain, when shared, could be transformed into strength. Time passed. Year after year, they lived with a quiet longing for each other. No letters, no phone calls. Only memory remained, like a scar both tender and precious. Nathaniel still sometimes wandered past the Garden District, pausing to look at the Whitmore mansion from afar, as if at a massive tomb. Isabella, after finishing sessions at the Haven, often sat alone in the dark and wondered, somewhere out there, did Nathaniel still think of her? Both had chosen separate roads. Those paths bore loss, but also new meaning. And fate, as always, waited in silence for the moment to bring their lives together once more. 10 years had passed since that fateful night at the Whitmore mansion. The world had changed, and so had they. Nathaniel was now a man in his 50s, hair streaked with silver, though his storm-gray eyes still carried their fierce intensity. He lived simply in a small coastal town, spending most of his days in humanitarian projects. Once the subject of scandal, time had dulled public memory, and in the arms of his local community, he was seen as kind, humble. Yet inside, a hollow space remained. Each night, Nathaniel dreamed of Isabella's brown eyes, the ones he had lost. Isabella, too, had changed. At 33, she was now the director of the Haven Project, which had grown into multiple branches across Texas. She carried the poise of a strong woman admired by many, but in quiet moments, she still bore an aching sadness. She had loved, had tried to open her heart again, but no relationship filled the space Nathaniel left behind. He was not only a memory but a scar etched deep, reminding her that some loves were both dangerous and unforgettable. One autumn day, fate intervened. A national charity conference on healing and art was held in New Orleans. Isabella was invited as a keynote speaker, while Nathaniel, serving as an advisor for a children's foundation, was also on the guest list. Neither knew of the other's presence until their eyes met across the crowded hall. In that moment, time halted. Amid the chatter and flashing cameras, they looked at each other as if the 10 years were only a long dream. In their eyes lay shock, pain, longing, and the quiet comfort of knowing they were still alive, still here. After her speech, Isabella stepped into the hallway, her heart pounding. She thought she might collapse when the familiar voice spoke behind her. "Isabella." She turned. Nathaniel stood there, older, wearier, but with the same eyes. They stood in silence for a long time before he exhaled, voice hoarse. "I've waited for this moment. 10 years." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "For 10 long years, I carried your absence like a wound that never healed." They drew closer, not touching, only breathing the same air. And among the passing crowd, the world seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them. During the days of the conference, they crossed paths many times. At first, it was only brief greetings, then gradually their conversations grew longer. They shared stories of the years gone by, their losses, their struggles, their hard-won achievements. The bitterness faded away, leaving only listening and understanding. One evening, as they left the conference center together, Nathaniel softly asked, "Will you walk with me for a while?" They wandered through the French Quarter, glowing with red lanterns, jazz drifting from every corner. The crisp autumn air of New Orleans recalled that rainy night long ago, but this time, there was no fear between them. By the banks of the Mississippi, Nathaniel stopped. He stared at the rushing water, then turned to Isabella, his eyes heavy with words long buried. "There is a truth I buried, out of fear. Years ago, I had a DNA test done. Isabella, you are not my sister. We share no blood. For all these years, I carried that silence like a curse, afraid you would hate me more if I spoke it. But tonight, I cannot hide it any longer." His voice broke, his hands clenched as if afraid she wouldn't believe him. "I stayed silent because I feared you would never forgive me for everything that happened. But the truth is, through every storm, every shadow, I carried only one constant. I never stopped loving you." Isabella stood frozen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her trembling lips curved into a quiet, relieved smile. "Nathaniel, I have loved you in silence all these years, and not a single day has passed without your name in my heart." In that instant, they embraced each other. No longer mistake, no longer torment, only two souls once swallowed by darkness, now finding each other again in the light. Their love was no longer a raging fire as before. It was a candle, gentle, steady, illuminating the path ahead. Nathaniel began working with the Haven Project, lending his experience and resources to help Isabella expand. For the first time, Isabella no longer felt she bore the weight alone. They did not know how many years remained, but they knew this. After all the loss, they had found a new beginning, imperfect yet true. That winter, New Orleans glowed in the Riverfront Festival of Lights. Crowds gathered, fireworks bloomed across the sky. Among them, Isabella and Nathaniel stood side by side. No longer hiding, no longer afraid. They had endured it all: love, guilt, loss, and finally found each other in the late dawn of life. Now, as the lights shimmered upon the Mississippi, they held hands in silence. Nathaniel, hair silvered, leaned close and whispered, "If one day you are no longer here, remember, I have loved you with all a lifetime could hold." Isabella smiled, tears glittering like crystal. "And if one day you are gone, I will go on loving you. In every story I tell, in every woman the Haven saves, our love will not fade, it will become a flame." Years later, when Nathaniel rested beneath the ancient oak in the Garden District Cemetery, Isabella still returned, not to weep, but to tell him of the Haven's growth, of women who found their voices again, of children who now had a chance to learn. She placed a small candle on his grave. Each year, on the very night of that long-ago storm, the candle burned against the dark, a reminder that love does not die, it only changes shape. In her twilight years, Isabella continued to lead the Haven Project, her hair streaked with silver, her voice steady and warm. Young volunteers often asked her, "How do you keep the flame alive when the world is so dark?" She would smile, her eyes far away. "The flame does not always roar. Sometimes it is only a trembling spark in the wind. But if we guard it, if we keep faith even in the darkest nights, that spark will outlast the storm." None of them knew that the flame in Isabella's heart bore a name, Nathaniel Whitmore. And so their story of a forbidden love, tragic yet filled with hope, came to its close. But the flame they once lit in the shadows still burned on, guiding lost souls forever.